Welcome, everyone, and good evening. I'm David Lesher. I'm the editor of CalMatters. For those of you who don't know us, CalMatters is an independent nonprofit news organization covering all of the major issues in California since we launched about 5 years ago. So tonight you are going to attend our Props to You event. It's the first of 5 events in a series that we're doing this week and next about all 12 of the propositions on California's 2020 ballot. So in this format, our reporters will be taking questions from voters and presenting them to representatives from both sides of these measures. Tonight, our 2 moderators will be Ben Christopher, a political reporter at CalMatters, and Matt Levin, the housing and data reporter at CalMatters. They'll be hosting conversations about 2 of our most contentious issues on this year's ballot, both amending Proposition 13, the landmark property tax California passed more than 40 years ago. Ben will host the conversation about Proposition 15, which would change the property tax law for businesses, and Matt will host the conversation about Proposition 19, about a portable property tax break for certain homeowners. We want to thank Nextdoor, which partnered with us on this event to help us collect some of the questions we'll be asking about the propositions that were collected from their members throughout the state of California. And for more information about these and all of the 12 propositions on this year's ballot, I want to also encourage you to look at our election guide at calmatters.org. You'll find information about the money and the polls and the arguments and the supporters and opponents, and you'll see a video explainer for each of the propositions. And you'll also see all of our work at CalMatters about all of the issues at the state level, from the virus and the wildfires to schools and the economy. So if you like what you see, I'd encourage you to become a subscriber or to become a member by making a donation. So now it's time to begin our program, and we'll start with our video explainer about Proposition 15, where you'll meet Ben Christopher. He's the star of this video, and then he will pick up and begin after the video with our Q&A. Thank you for joining us.
Remember 1978? California's home prices were soaring. Some homeowners, led by this guy, were mad as hell about their ever-increasing property taxes. So voters passed Prop 13, and Californians have been busy voting on property taxes ever since. Over the last 4 decades, Californians have passed the last 4 decades, Californians have passed more than 20 ballot measures, adding new rules for how homes and other properties are taxed. 2020 is no different, but Prop 15, also known as split roll, is the big one. If it passes, it will be the biggest change to California's tax system in a generation. Let me explain.
Hi, I'm Ben Christopher. I'm a political reporter with CalMatters, and I'm going to explain Prop 15 in a minute.
Properties used to be taxed based on the current home price. If a house's value doubled, so did the taxes. Then voters put a stop to that. Under Prop 13, properties are taxed based on their original purchase price. The longer you stay in your home, the larger the tax break. That also applies to commercial properties, which leads us to Prop 15. Prop 15 splits homes from commercial properties, putting them on different tax rolls, hence split roll. If it passes, nothing changes for homeowners, but lots of commercial landlords would be stripped of their Prop 13 protections and will probably have to start paying a lot more. Not so for small businesses and farms. They're exempt. Supporters say this is a great way to provide more funding to cash-strapped schools and local governments, and that large corporations will pay the most. Opponents say this would be one of the largest tax increases ever, and they warn that landlords will pass the higher costs on to their tenants, which might be small businesses. So, vote yes if you want commercial properties to be taxed based on today's mostly higher market prices. Vote no if you want to keep things the way they are. For more on the 2020 election and everything else about California's politics, go to calmatters.org.
Hey everyone, I'm Ben Christopher. I'm the live version of the political reporter at CalMatters. Hopefully you at least were able to see most of that. Thanks for bearing with us. We're working out the technical glitches in this first event that we're doing, but I'll be moderating the Q&A about Prop 15. I just gave you the quick summary of the proposition in the video you saw, and now we're going to go into a bit more detail. And I'll be using questions that we received from Nextdoor users in California about what a yes or a no vote on Prop 15 actually means. So joining us tonight to answer those questions are two people who officially represent the yes and no sides of Prop 15. On the yes side, we have Ben Grief. He's the campaign director and spokesperson for Evolve California, which is a nonprofit working to increase education funding and to reform Prop 13. Ben, welcome. He's coming.
Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Sure. And on the no side is John Kupal, president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, which was founded, the association was founded by the man responsible for getting Proposition 13 on the ballot and passed by the voters in 1978. So John, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to CalMatters for sponsoring this event.
Great. So as Dave mentioned, this is a Q&A, so we're not looking for a repeat of last week's presidential debate here. This is an opportunity for voters who might not fully understand what this prop is actually about to learn something. So we're looking for clear, succinct, hopefully jargon-free answers. So the guidelines that we'll be hopefully sticking to is I'm going to go through 4 questions we received from Nextdoor users. If for anyone watching, if you have a question of your own, write it in the Ask a Question chat box. And if there's time for a 5th question, I'll try to sneak one in. And Ben and John, for each of these questions, we'll get 2 minutes to respond, and we'll send you a 30-minute remaining a little reminder. So hopefully we can stick to that. And if you want to respond to something that the other person said, feel free to do that, but that will be part of your 2 minutes. I will alternate who goes first, just to be fair. And if you're watching, please stick around till the end, because we're going to do a little Insta poll after the Q&A to see how you plan to vote on Prop 15 based on what you've heard. So, assuming everyone's set, there are a lot of numbers and a lot of jargon thrown around in this discussion. It can feel very technical sometimes, but I wanted to kind of start broad. And Ben, if I could start with you. If Proposition 15 passes, how would this directly affect individual Californians? Would the average voter notice a difference, do you think?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. They certainly would. Right now, we are suffering under a system where over the last 40 years, we've lost $150 billion from the fact that large commercial and industrial properties have not been paying fair market value property taxes. And so what Prop 15 will do is generate reliable, stable revenue for our local schools and our local communities. So not a dime of this money will be going to Sacramento. This is all money that will be going to our counties, our cities, our special districts, such as fire districts, as well as schools. So folks all across California will get to benefit from the fact that not only are large commercial property owners paying their fair share, but also it's going to be generating desperately needed revenue at a time when our local governments and our schools really desperately need it. So this is something that the Yes on 15 campaign feels like, and the majority of Californians right now are saying this will have a direct benefit for them and everyday Californian lives.
Okay, well, great, thanks. And John, do you want to take a crack at that? How do you think this would directly affect individual Californians?
Well, first of all, I think it would result, let's start at the 60,000-foot level, and that is this would be the largest property tax increase in the history of California. And I think the threshold question is, why do we need higher taxes to begin with? California already has the highest income tax rate in America at 13.3%. We have the highest state sales tax rate in America at 7.25%. We have the highest gas tax in America, highest corporate tax west of the Mississippi. And even with Proposition 13, California is above average in per capita property tax collections. So again, sorry to throw around numbers, but we rank 20th out of 50 states in per capita property tax collections. We have seen voters recently, for example, reject a statewide school bond, not because they're anti-education, it's because even progressives have come up to us and said, we don't see the value that we're getting for the taxes that we're paying. Specifically to your question, Ben, about how this would impact individual homeowners, yes, there will be a significant impact. Cost of living is one of the California's biggest problems. We're one of the highest cost of living states in America, and this is one of the reasons people are leaving California in droves. Is simply cost of living. What's going to happen when the businesses that we patronize have to pay higher taxes? They're going to pass those costs along to others. But the other concern for individual homeowners is that the proponents have made it clear that this is but the first step in the complete dismantling of Proposition 13. The agenda is fairly clear. Let's go after commercial and industrial property first, then we'll go after apartments, and then we'll come after homeowners. So our members understand that there is an agenda here for even higher taxes and the complete dismantling of Proposition 13.
Okay, well, I do want to get to that point in a second about how this distinguishes between commercial, industrial property and also residential. But you raise an interesting point, which I do want to get to, which is that how this, you mentioned that this is one of the largest tax increases, if not the largest property tax increases in California history. And Mark in San Diego, he wrote and asked how this is likely to affect the state economy as a whole, particularly at a time when we're dealing with a big recession. So John, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Sure, I think this would be the worst time to impose an additional tax increase on Californians. I mean, you know, the complaint is that local governments are struggling. Well, taxpayers are struggling too. I mean, unemployment is higher in California than it is nationally. And again, I think people are looking at the landscape here and seeing that the cost of living is very high. So I think this is one of the negative effects of Proposition 15 that people can grasp very easily.
And Ben, what do you say to that? How do you think this would affect the overall state economy?
This will certainly be a net positive for the overall state economy. And I think I do want to clarify something that John brought up. You know, 92% of the revenue that Prop 15 is estimated to generate is coming from just 10% of commercial properties in California. So the idea that this is a uniform tax on all commercial properties or all businesses is a complete scare tactic, because most commercial property owners in California are paying their fair share of property taxes. It's only a small minority of large commercial property owners that have been holding on to their properties for the last 30 or 40 years and are still paying property taxes from those days. You know, we're talking about Chevron, for example, who's undertaxed by $100 million every year. So what this is doing is closing loopholes, generating $12 billion of desperately needed funding for our schools and communities at a time when we face unprecedented budget deficits, while also protecting homeowners, renters, and small businesses, as well as agricultural land. And, you know, I'd also like to address something that John alluded to, and the opposition is doing whatever they can to really take the focus off the fact that large commercial property owners, like your Chevrons, like your Donald Trumps, are not paying their fair share, by trying to scare folks into thinking that somehow this has anything to do with the residential property taxes. You know, I cannot say it enough. All residential properties will be protected under Prop 15. It really strengthens protections for residential property owners. So if you're an apartment owner, if you have a mobile home, if you live in an assisted living facility, if it's a live workspace, if you Airbnb out your property, whatever the case may be, you will be protected under Prop 15. That is the number one most important thing to remember. And unfortunately, we're only hearing lies and scare tactics from our opposition. And I really would hope that we could focus on the actual merits of this really important ballot measure.
Okay, so we've been talking about the tax aspect of it so far, but let's move on to the revenue, because this would, if it passes, raise between $6.5 and $11.5 billion. In the proposition, 60% of that would go to cities and counties, 40% would go to schools. So Rose in Santa Rosa wrote in and asked, can you say how this money would actually be spent? Would it be spread evenly across the state? Are there particular Californians who would benefit more than others? Ben, can you speak to that?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a great question. And the answer is all Californians will benefit. This is providing additional revenue to all counties in California, all cities and all special districts, and especially all schools in our state. Right now we have a system where large commercial property owners are exploiting these loopholes to avoid paying property taxes at fair market value, like they would have to in any other state. So really, the important reason to vote yes on Prop 15 is to really say, why is it that Trump can pay fair market value property taxes in Florida at his Mar-a-Lago property, but he's not paying fair market value property taxes on his property in San Francisco or his golf course in Palos Verdes? That doesn't make any sense. And that's all we're working to do with this initiative, is just to simply put our state on par with how the rest of the country taxes large commercial property owners, valued over $3 million, by the way. So all commercial property that's valued under $3 million will be exempt from this. But really, this is something that benefits our schools, our cities, our counties, our special districts, but especially someone coming from Sonoma. This benefits our fire districts. Every year, this will generate $390 million to our fire districts. And at a time that we're in now of unprecedented wildfires all across the state that are affecting all Californians, but especially those in rural communities, this money is going to be a godsend. That's really what this is about. It's providing desperately needed revenue for our schools and our public services, like our first responders, like our firefighters, without changing anything for any taxes on homeowners, renters, or small businesses. This is just common sense. And so it will benefit all of us, and it will close loopholes and make large commercial property owners like your Chevrons of the world finally pay fair market value in property taxes.
Okay, so John, Ben said that this money is going to be a godsend for local communities. But do you have any concerns about how this money is going to be allocated?
Well, first of all, let's address this $3 million threshold. That's just false. It's not a $3 million for the value of the property. It's the $3 million for the total value of the commercial property owned by that particular property owner. And every little strip mall out there is worth probably $1 million. And if the property owner owns cumulatively more than $3 million, then they will be subsumed under the punishing impacts of Proposition 15. And 80% of California small businesses do not own their own land. They lease. And those leases are called triple net leases, which means that the tax liability imposed on the landlord immediately flows down to the tenant.
So John, my next question is about triple net leases. I do want to get to that.
Let me finish this point.
Okay.
Let me finish this point. He'll talk about Chevron and Disney, but we're going to be talking about Manny's Muffler Shop and Susie's Alterations. This is why the Small Business Federation, the National Federation of Independent Business, is so diametrically opposed to this particular proposal. If they're not concerned about Chevron and Disney, this is a huge impact on small businesses. Any business that has a triple net lease needs to consider very carefully the impact of Proposition 15.
And did you want to say anything about how the money raised by this measure is going to be
well
spent?
I mean, how many times have we heard that it's for the kids? I mean, and you would think that in California, one of the most highly taxed states in America, that they would use the money that we give them more efficiently. I look at jurisdictions like Los Angeles, LA Unified School District. They recently proposed a parcel tax called Measure EE, and it required a 2/3 vote, didn't even get simple majority. Again, not because the voters within the boundaries of the LA Unified School District are anti-education. It's just that we see so much waste, fraud, and abuse in government in California that there's concerns that the money will in fact not get to the places where the proponents claim it will.
Okay. So you did mention this issue of leasing, and that is a question that I get quite a lot, and we've got a number of viewers who brought it up. So what happens if you're a small business that rents? Is there anything to keep a landlord from passing that cost along to the tenant?
No, in fact, it's required under the typical lease. Now, it may not be every lease, but your typical commercial lease is a triple net lease, which means that the landlord will pass the cost on to the tenant. Now, if the risk is losing the tenant, maybe the landlord will have to absorb some of the cost, but the reality is 9 times out of 10, the small business will have to absorb the cost. An example of this is I gave a presentation on Prop 15 at a restaurant in Los Angeles just last week, and I speculated about whether or not that restaurant was under a triple net lease or whether they own the property. And the owner came up to me and said, this property, I lease this restaurant. It is owned by a property owner who has had an original base from 1978. If his property taxes go up by an order of magnitude by 10, that comes on me. I will close my door. And that's typical. And this is one of the reasons you have very well-respected, very popular restaurants here in Sacramento, like Mulvaney's. The owner of Mulvaney's has come out and he's done the math. This will slam the restaurant industry. So we need to be very careful, and people need to understand what the impact is on just small businesses. And again, as small businesses have to pay more, then that will be passed along to the consumers and the people who patronize those small businesses.
So Ben, you're shaking your head. So what about these small business owners who are concerned that, hey, under the terms of my lease, I have to pay the property tax?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I would say is that Prop 15 is a benefit to small businesses. What John didn't mention is that Prop 15 gives the largest tax cut in a generation to small businesses. Prop 15 will exempt the first $500,000 of business equipment from taxation, which will virtually eliminate that tax for small businesses in California. And for folks that aren't familiar with that tax, like, if you mention a restaurant, John, this is something that forces a restaurant owner to count up all their silverware, their pots and pans, their tables and chairs, their refrigerators, their ovens, and they have to pay a tax on that every year. That's a cumbersome tax. And it's a perfect example of how California has had to nickel and dime individuals and small business owners to make up for the fact that large commercial property owners aren't paying fair market value property taxes, and that we've lost $150 million over the last 40 years from this loophole that doesn't exist anywhere else. So I think it's really important also to know that, again, most properties in California are valued at less than $3 million. So most properties will be exempt. And the truth is that Prop 15 is phased in over time. And it has a strict provision in the measure that states that if you are a commercial property owner that has property valued at over $3 million, but you have a majority of tenants that are small businesses, you won't be reassessed until 2025, 2026 at the earliest. So that gives ample time to come up with a rental agreement that works for both the tenant and the landlord. And again, rent is determined by the market. It's not determined by the property taxes paid by a landlord. If that were the case, then California would have the lowest rents in the country. But of course, that's not the case, and we don't have the lowest rents in the country. I'd also like to add that most small businesses in California are home-based businesses. So this will not affect home-based businesses at all. Those small business owners will also benefit from Prop 15 by making sure that they don't have to have a tax on business equipment anymore. So this is something, it's just common sense. Folks out there, don't believe the scare tactics that the opposition is peddling. This is just putting our state on par with how the rest of the country taxes large commercial property, with a lot of protections for small businesses.
Okay, so I do think we have time for one more question if we all keep it snappy. This was kind of a broad question. We've circled around it a bit, but this is from Rita in Anaheim and also Lori in Acampo. They both sent this in. Ben, there's this question of, is Prop 15 a standalone effort, sort of one and done, or are there plans in the future to eventually change the way that property taxes apply to residences and homes as well?
Yeah, absolutely not. Again, this is just a scare tactic that the opposition employs to avoid talking about this giant corporate loophole that we have in our commercial property tax system. And they can try to dig up all the sort of quotes from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, different things from various organizations, but that has nothing to do with where we are now. We have a large statewide coalition with community groups, faith-based groups, labor organizations that are all committed to generating reliable, stable revenue for our schools and our communities the right way, by closing corporate loopholes and having this $12 billion generated every single year going back to our schools and back to our communities. So the very notion that it's anything other than that is, again, a complete scare tactic to avoid talking about the truth, right? And the truth is, right now, our communities are hurting. And our communities have been disinvested in for 40 years, right? When we passed our current property tax law 42 years ago, it was about keeping grandma in her home. And so why do we have 42 years later a situation where Chevron is getting the same benefit that grandma is? That's not what this was about. The idea is to close loopholes, generate reliable, stable revenue, especially during the time that we're in now. This initiative was important earlier, but honestly, right now with the budget deficits that we're facing, this common sense initiative is more important than ever. And I'm urging everyone to vote yes on 15, join our large group that we have of endorsers, join the California Democratic Party, the League of Women Voters, the California PTA, the ACLU, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Governor Newsom. This is a common sense. I've said it a lot, but it's true. This is a common sense initiative that will do wonders for us as we have to bounce back over the coming years to try to figure out how we're going to come out of this pandemic.
Okay. Well, John, I'm guessing you might take issue with that. Do you want to?
Yes. First of all, Ben keeps on using the notion that this is some sort of loophole, that somehow Prop 13 created a loophole for commercial property. The reality is California has had a unified tax roll since the 1800s. Proposition 13 did not change that. Proposition 13 took a policy that said all property should be treated the same and continued it. And so there was never any loophole. But perhaps most telling about this particular initiative is that the people who are charged with implementing it, the County Assessors Association rarely takes a position on any ballot measure, but they have come out as an organization and come out diametrically opposed to Proposition 15. Even some of the assessors who are not big fans of Prop 13 have said, not only is Prop 15 difficult to implement, it's impossible to implement. And as to whether or not it applies to home-based businesses, what is a home-based businesses will be left up to the legislature to define. And as home-based businesses have to apply with their local governments for a business license, what happens when the state of California defines a business as having to pull a local business license? So we have to be very careful about where we're treading here, about whether or not home-based businesses will be covered. And at the end of the day, I'm very concerned, as are the assessors, that the implementation of this is going to be so fraught with errors and end up the taxpayers being at the losing end once again.
Okay, so we covered a lot, I think, but we are out of time. So for anyone watching, please take the Zoom poll, vote yes or no. There it is, just popped up on my screen too. And we'll see how it goes. And so John and Ben, thank you so much for your time and for helping make some sense of Prop 15, making it a little bit easier for the voters to understand. So thanks so much.
You're welcome. Take care.
And thank you again to Nextdoor and its users who took the time to write and to send us questions that honestly, probably a lot of Californians have as well. And for the rest of you, please stick around and we'll be back shortly with part 2 on Proposition 19 and the portable property tax break for homeowners. Thanks.
All right. Great. I just got a notification in the chat that everyone can see me and hopefully hear me okay. I'm Matt Levin, housing and data reporter with CalMatters. I'll be moderating the second half of the show, which is focused on Proposition 19. So let's kick it off with me in a mass narrating this Proposition Explained in 1 minute video. What do real estate agents, firefighters, baby boomers, and the Big Lebowski all have in common? Proposition 19. Hi, I'm Matt. I'm the housing and data reporter at CalMatters, and I'm going to explain Prop 19, the Portable Property Tax Break Initiative, in 1 minute. If you're having voter deja vu, here's why. In 2018, California Realtors put a sweet baby boomer tax break on the ballot. Seniors who buy a new house would keep the same lower property tax rate they would have owed on their old house, based on what they originally paid for it way back when. Voters disagreed, worried about billions in lost revenue for schools and cities. Well, the Realtors are back again with pretty much the same idea, but they have a new twist on how to pay for it.
This is still our house!
Right now, Californians can inherit homes from their parents, rent them, and still pay their parents' low property tax rates. It's why actor Jeff Bridges was probably paying less than you in property taxes on the Malibu estate he inherited. Prop 19 would close the Lebowski loophole, generating hundreds of millions in tax revenue. Firefighters would get a big cut of those dollars. Opponents say it's a special interest giveaway to realtors to boost commissions. So vote yes if you think older Californians should keep their low property taxes when they move. Vote no if you think they shouldn't, and that Californians should not have to pay higher taxes for what they inherit. For more on Prop 19 and everything else on your ballot, go to calmatters.org. Okay. Hopefully that helped articulate a little bit about what Prop 19 is about. We are going to be using the same Q&A format that Ben so effectively moderated on Prop 15. I'll start by introducing the two representatives of the yes and no sides on Prop 19. On the yes side is Liza Negrete, Vice President of Political Affairs for the California Association of Realtors. Liza, are you there?
I'm here. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And on the no side is Susan Shelley, Vice President of Communications for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association.
Hello, great to be with you.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks for Howard Jarvis pulling double duty today. A reminder of the Q&A guidelines. Hopefully you guys watched the Prop 15 debate. I'm going to ask both of you 4 questions that we got from Nextdoor users to our audience that's still watching. If you still have a question of your own, you can write them in the Ask a Question chat box. If there's time for a 5th question, I will do a moderator's choice and select one of the questions that you guys submitted. Liza and Susan, for each of these questions, you'll get 2 minutes to respond directly to the voters' questions, which I've adapted in some cases to try to make it a little more generalizable. Remember that you're going to get a 30-second ping when your time is about to run out. Feel free to rebut anything that the other side has said, but just remember that that's taking up some of your own time. And everyone, just like we did with Prop 15, will also be doing another Insta poll based off of the debate that we just had. So stick around for that. So let's hop right into it. We're going to start off with a question from Martha from Covina, who I think may be thinking of retiring to the Central Coast. And we're going to throw this question to you first, Liza. Will some counties like San Luis Obispo continue to be able to deny people from outside their county from being able to transfer their primary residence tax base to a replacement residence? And if you could maybe elaborate on kind of what the current benefits might be available now to seniors who want to move and how Prop 19 might change those.
Sure. Under current law, seniors who want to move have some options. They may be able to move within their own county or be able to move within counties who have agreed to accept them and their property tax base. However, when they choose to move into those areas, they are limited to purchasing a property that is of equal or lesser value to the current property that they have. Proposition 19 provides additional flexibility for seniors who want to move. Under Proposition 19, seniors would be able to move anywhere in the state, be able to purchase a home that is of higher value compared to their current home, and still be able to carry their property tax basis. So this means that for the person that wants to move to San Luis Obispo and purchase another property, sometimes seniors want to purchase a more humble or less expensive property, but that's just not realistic under current market conditions. So even if they want to purchase a more humble home, under current market prices, they may not be able to do that. So Prop 19 allows you to carry your tax bases anywhere in the state for any price home.
And Susan, does your organization support this part of the initiative?
Well, yes, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association supported portability when it was on the ballot in 2018, but the voters did not. The voters rejected it 60% to 40%. And now it's back with a giant tax increase attached to it. We don't think that's an improvement.
So that's a perfect segue to another question that we get. This is from Cindy in Hawthorne, and we'll start with you, Susan. If a child inherits their parents' home, will Prop 19 raise their taxes? And if you can say what the initiative does, and then whether you think that's a good idea or a bad idea.
Okay, well, let me explain where the parent-child transfer exclusion came from. It comes from 1986. The legislature put a constitutional amendment on the ballot by a unanimous vote that said, when property is transferred between parents and children, it is not subject to reassessment at all. And this applied to a principal residence of any value and up to $1 million of assessed value of other property. And that's a small family business. That's a small apartment building that someone bought years ago for retirement income. That's any kind of income property that the family owns. That was all in Prop 58, and voters approved that 75.7%. And Proposition 19 wipes that out. And 10 years later, after Prop 58, the voters decided to extend those same rules to grandparents and grandchildren if the children's parents were deceased. So they looked at it, the voters looked at it, they kept it, they extended it to the grandparents' generation. Proposition 19 wipes that out. The only way you get an exclusion on the parent-child transfer under Prop 19 is if the person to whom a residence is transferred moves into it within 1 year and uses it as a principal residence. That's the only part of it that is left. And that's a huge tax increase on families.
Liza, do you want to respond?
Sure. Shelley is correct. The voters wanted to make sure that when they passed Proposition 58, that people who inherited their family's home would be able to keep it at an affordable tax rate. And so the voters said, we like that the people who are inheriting homes can keep the homes and not price them out of the home just based on the new tax rate that they might be charged. And that was the original intent of the voters. Unfortunately, what has become of Proposition 58 is it has created an unintentional consequence, which means that investment properties are not being reassessed. And we're surprised that Howard Jarvis is opposing us, as particularly for that portion of the proposition, because when Jeff Bridges was featured by the LA Times and they showed this loophole, John Kopal said, that is correct. The voters did not intend for Prop 58 to work the way it does. And so we're very surprised by their opposition. Nevertheless, we're happy to be moving forward with a broad range of support. Not only did we did we gather 1.5 million signatures, a record in the state, but we have a broad support of coalition from folks both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. Howard Jarvis is the only opposition. So I encourage voters to look at our list of supporters and see the diversity that's been created to support and move Prop 19 forward.
Okay, we got another question from Jody in Los Angeles. I'll steer this one to you first, Liza. Does this initiative allow multiple moves to retain the tax break for seniors, or just one move? And maybe you can elaborate on how you guys foresee Prop 19 impacting the housing market should it pass.
I'm not sure I understood the first portion of the question, so if I can, I want to start with how it might impact the housing market.
Sure.
Okay, so we do believe that there are a lot of seniors that are stuck in their homes because they don't want to pay the higher tax rate on the purchase price of a new home. And so they are just sitting in homes that no longer fits their needs. A lot of seniors live in homes that might be 2 stories and more suited for bigger families. But again, they cannot afford to move homes. Many seniors are in very limited income. And, you know, we have heard from our members about this issue for over 10 years. And we believe, and the legislative analysts also reported, that in the first year, we expect about up to 60,000 people choosing to move based on this new benefit.
And Susan, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, please. There's, first of all, I'd like to say that Howard Jarvis is not the only opposition to this. The League of Women Voters is opposed to it. The Los Angeles Times is opposed to it. The California State Association of Counties is opposed to it. Today, the League of Cities decided that they were going to take no position on this. It affects different counties differently with regard to affordability, depending on where people are coming from and where they're going to, and the price of the house that they buy and the tax base they're taking with them. That's why there's really no way to say how it affects affordability or availability of housing. It really depends on where you are and whether there are more sellers or buyers. And this is why the legislative analyst said it's impossible to figure out exactly how much money it will raise or cost, because it all depends on the decisions that people make and whether they would have made those decisions to move anyway, because we do have portability under current law, under Proposition 60 and Proposition 90. It just has a few limitations because it's intended to be used for downsizing.
Susan, on that note, you mentioned the LAO analysis. That's the Legislative Analyst Office, the nonpartisan organization that analyzed the fiscal impact of Prop 19. They did find that overall that this would provide tens of millions and possibly hundreds of millions to local governments and the state as a whole. I'm curious whether you believe that and what your general reaction is to the fiscal impact of Prop 19.
Well, I will defer to the people with the pencils in the Legislative Analyst's Office on the exact calculations, but I can tell you that people think today that the lottery funds the schools. Why do they think that? Because there were so many TV commercials saying the lottery, it's for the schools. The lottery, it's for the schools. It's a trickle of funding for the schools. And this is a trickle of funding for the fire districts. This is not something that was created to fund the fire districts. This is something that was created to force people to sell their property by raising their property taxes, thereby causing more listings on the market. That's what's going on here. It's about the inventory of the real estate market and whether people can choose to move because they get a great tax break, or they're forced to move because they've got a huge property tax increase. And let me just add that even when people intend to sell their family property, sometimes there's 18 months or 2 years to settle the affairs. If people inherit property and take 2 years to settle the affairs, they will pay market rate assessment property taxes from the date of death to the close of escrow. And that can be thousands of dollars of tax increase from current law on California families who just lost a parent.
Liza, do you want to address the fiscal impact of Prop 19 and then what the revenue may go towards?
Sure. Well, and as Susan Shelley said, I'll refer to the legislative analyst's office for those numbers. But according to an economic analysis done, Proposition 19 will raise revenues by over $4 billion, potentially by as much as $5 billion per year over time. The money is scheduled to go to local governments and school, and it creates a fund specifically to fight wildfires that could not be rated by the state. With the current wildfire season and already seeing a huge loss of housing supply and the housing crisis we are experiencing, that type of revenue is greatly needed, not only to strengthen our communities, but also to continue to fight wildfires in California.
Okay, I'm seeing a couple other questions pop up here. Here's a good one from Sam. What are the pros and cons of allowing tax exemptions for the inheritance of investment properties? Liza, why don't we start with you for that one?
The pros and cons of allowing tax benefits for investment properties?
Yes, the quote unquote loophole that your initiative would take away in many instances.
Well, the ability of the state not being able to tax folks who are holding on to investment properties means that those properties are not currently being reassessed to their market value rate. So the state, local governments, and our local communities are missing out on a lot of funds. Many of these investors keep properties in California, but they don't live in California. So why should a lot of these out-of-state folks benefit from the same tax rate as some of the folks that choose to live in the homes that they inherit and are California residents? So we do believe that California should allow people who inherit properties from their parents to be able to keep the tax base when they live in the home. And we believe that Prop 19 protects people to keep the family homes and excludes everyone else. And we think that that's something that needed to be fixed because that was not the intention of the voters when Proposition 58 was originally passed.
And Susan, I know you touched on this a little already, but the pros and cons of eliminating this tax break for inheritors of investment vehicles.
Well, when you say investment vehicles, what does that really mean? Suppose you have an immigrant family that has worked for 2 generations and they've bought a restaurant property and they operate it, and it has thin margins in California. This is a tough state to do business in, particularly now, 6 months into our effective lockdown. So this business property is an income property, or maybe it's a small apartment building with 4 tenants in it. And instead of current law allowing that property to be passed to the heirs without a tax increase, under Prop 19, on the day of death, that property is reassessed to market value. And literally, these families are opening the sympathy cards, and one of them is a new tax bill.
On that note, here's an interesting question from Hallie K. She's bringing up the issue of gentrification as it relates to Prop 19, and I'll just read from her question. Having to pay full property taxes will force working class families to sell and move out, which of course means more sales for realtors and fewer working class families in these neighborhoods. How would Prop 19 not exacerbate gentrification? Liza, let's start with you.
Well, you know, Prop 19, from the realtor perspective, is just a small part in a way to help increase accessibility to housing. As I mentioned, lots of seniors are stuck in homes that no longer suit their needs. And a lot of those homes are very good fits for families that are growing or even bigger families that, you know, include parents and grandparents. And you know, that is just a very small portion of helping to solve the housing crisis in California. There are other things that need to be done, and there is not a single magic solution to help solve the housing crisis. And so we believe that Prop 19 is a good step forward in helping to increase the housing availability for young families that want to buy new homes.
And Susan?
On the gentrification question, I think the questioner is exactly right. It will cause gentrification because you have neighborhoods where there are older apartment buildings, some under rent control, and all of a sudden there's this enormous property tax increase on a property that's been held maybe for 40 years, or even for 10 years. There's a huge property tax increase when that is reassessed to market value on the date of death. And therefore, the heirs are very likely to either raise the rents if they can, and if they can't raise the rents, they're very likely to sell. Well, who's going to buy it? Probably a developer of market rate housing, and probably a gentrifying sort of effect from these older homeowners, property owners who own these older apartment buildings everywhere in California, all selling upon death. And I think it would definitely have a gentrifying effect. I'd be very concerned about that.
This question comes from Matt in his podcast booth in Sacramento and is a self-serving one. But there was an interesting analysis from the California Budget and Policy Center on Prop 19, which looked at who would actually benefit from the initiative. And it found that disproportionately you were looking at white, older homeowners, obviously, who tended to be richer and wealthier than maybe your average Californian. So I guess the question to Liza then is, one, do you agree with that analysis? And then two, if you do, why should we be targeting a tax break to that specific population?
Absolutely not. We believe that Prop 19 helps all of Californians. With the revenue that's being generated for fire and emergency response, schools, and local government, all California residents will be able to benefit from those funds. In terms of seniors that are receiving the ability to carry their tax basis, that just helps open up more availability of housing for folks that need bigger homes. And it also helps those seniors move into homes that suit their needs. One of the things to consider as we put this in the context of the housing crisis is that senior housing is actually easier to get approved compared to other types of housing. And so we do believe that Prop 19 will also help create a demand for more senior housing. As I mentioned, it's easier to get it approved compared to other types of housing developments. Again, we have better protection for wildfires, new funding for schools, revenues, and local governments. And so Prop 19 will benefit all Californians. And for those that only choose to focus on one provision and what may be considered a tax benefit for seniors, are completely ignoring the fact that we're closing the Lebowski loophole, which is Jeff Bridges not paying as much taxes as the rest of the people that are purchasing properties with their hard-earned money and work. So I think that you can't just pick and choose parts that you like and don't like, which is what the opposition is doing. I think you have to take a look at it as a whole. This proposition is very unique because it not only has had a lot of work based on, trying to help solve the housing crisis, but the legislature went through it and that we were able to gain bipartisan support, and including folks on the Republican side. And if you look at who voted for it, we have folks from both sides of the aisle. And, if you've heard of the saying, legislation is similar to sausage making process. Yes, there's a lot of things people don't like. There's criticism, but people like parts of it. But the truth is, most Californians will benefit from Prop 19.
Okay, Liza. And then Susan, if you could talk about whether this tax benefit is targeted towards the right population. And this will be the last question here.
Well, this tax benefit of portability, which once again is an expansion of portability that we already have under the state constitution. This just expands it to more places and more properties for triple the number of uses of it. So we already have it, this expands it. It certainly helps existing homeowners over the age of 55. They will be able to move 3 times and take their current tax base with them to a new property anywhere in the state of any price, and then get a blend. If it's more expensive, get a blended assessment. It certainly helps existing homeowners over 55. I don't know what the racial composition is in some areas. That might be Hispanic homeowners, that might be Black homeowners, that might be homeowners, depending on where you are in the state, of any racial composition. It certainly helps existing homeowners over the age of 55. But I have to push back on this idea that this was a loophole. Proposition 58 was put on the ballot by the legislature by a unanimous vote, and it passed 75.7% in 1986. And in 1996, the voters revisited it for grandparents and kept it No loophole. It includes $1 million of assessed value of other property besides the main residence. That was always part of it. It's to protect small family businesses.
Okay, we are just about out of time. I think we're going to put up that Zoom poll again. So please vote yes or no. Curious if anybody's mind has been changed. We'll see the results on the closing screen before you all leave the meeting. Liza and Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks again to Nextdoor and its users who took the time to write and send us these great questions about these two propositions that they'll see on their November ballot. We'll be back tomorrow for our second Props to You event, which is about how tough should California be on crime, which involves Props 15 and Props 20. That'll be a good one. It will start an hour earlier than tonight's event, going from 5 to 6 p.m. so we don't overlap with the vice presidential debate. Please don't forget to vote. Besides these events and our explained in 1-minute videos, we've got a great voter guide with more info, including how to find out whether you're registered to vote, how to get a ballot sent to you, deadlines to send it in, where your nearest polling place and drop-off boxes, etc. And help us keep things like this going. Things like our voter guide, videos, events, and overall coverage of California policy and politics. Consider becoming a donor or a member and giving us some financial support, going to our website and making a donation at calmatters.org. Good night, everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and we will be back here tomorrow at 5 p.m.